For more details, let's bring in NEC Director Kevin Hassett. A good day in the White House, I imagine,
David.
Kevin. You got strong growth, lower inflation. Looks like a perfect scenario.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would like to add is that Larry Kudlow and I, on the show for the last 2 months, have been telling you you're going to get a 4% number.
You did indeed.
And so it's really interesting to see the headlines from the fake news. Everywhere you look, it's like, oh, it's a completely surprising north of 4% number. But the point is that President Trump's policies are working, and they're very visibly working now because we've seen the data. And you know, President Trump, when we were talking about the numbers, he said something like, "Well, why don't we get 20%?" Did you see that he truthed to that today?
I did. That's a little ambitious.
I don't know about 20%, but the point is that we're in a very unprecedented time. The macro thing is that it's just like when we invented the computer, and then or was it Al Gore that did that? He used the internet, and then all of a sudden in the 90s we had incredible growth year after year after year with no inflation. And so,
well, I think we could. By the way, I think we could put it. I think we have those numbers. Do you have the numbers, producers? Can you put that up? Because the Reagan tax cuts, for a lot of reasons, mostly political, didn't kick in until January 1, 1983. The next 6 years, you were growing. The first year, you grew at about 4.5%. The second year, the United States grew at over 7%. And I think the average of 6 years was about 4.5%. Do you think that's going to be that case for the rest of the Trump administration? There are the numbers.
Yeah, that's right. You know, so what happened with the Reagan numbers is an example, but there was a second example. So Reagan did it with tax policy, and then it happened in the late 90s, really because computers made everybody more productive. The thing about what President Trump intuits, which is true, is that we've got both of those. So we've got artificial intelligence increasing productivity, and we've got amazing tax policy as well. And so there's a chance that we get to numbers north of even what you've seen without inflation. And that's the other thing that the president mentioned in his truth today, which I really want to reemphasize because he understands this, is that if you see growth because the government is sending checks to everybody and the Fed is printing money, then that's going to cause inflation. The Fed's going to have to raise rates. But if you feel growth because of supply side effects, then you can get the growth without the inflation. And that's something that we're seeing right now. As you know, CPI came in with a core of 1.6% just last week. And so we're getting growth without inflation, which is really proving both Reagan and Trump correct.
Well, and the classic inflation definition is too much money chasing too few goods. If you have more goods and services, which is what all these incentives create, then that also brings down inflation. So not only do you have to close up the money spigot, but you have to produce more, which we're doing with productivity, and high productivity also brings down inflation. So you have a lot going for it. By the way, there was a name missing in the names that you mentioned, yourself and Larry, the great Art Laffer, the godfather of supply side
economics. The one who taught us all.
We had him on yesterday. Here's what he said before the numbers came out. Roll it.
So we have wonderful, wonderful numbers coming in, and I just can't. I'm just really excited. Put all those together, David, and I think you could get a 4 or 5% growth, a couple of quarters at that level. I think you could. I'm not sure we will, but I think you could. But you're going to get some nice growth numbers over the next year.
And of course, Kevin, Larry is saying 5%. Do you think you kind of poured a little cold water over his 20% figure? But what about 5%? And of course, Reagan during one of those years got 7%. Is that possible?
Right. You know, it is possible. But I think that one of the things I also want to reemphasize is that in the end, when we're thinking about the trajectory of the economy, we can sometimes get really focused on like the month-to-month stuff. But the long-term stuff, like the supply side tax cuts, but also the huge change in trade policy. Those are the things that drive American growth. And so think about this. This is something I looked up this morning after looking. 1.6% of the increase in GDP came from a reduction in the trade deficit. And I went back and looked, and when President Trump took office in 2017, 22% of our imports came from China. In today's data, it's only 9%. Can you imagine? And so all of that stuff that used to come from China is coming from here in the U.S., which drives up wages, drives up real incomes, and doesn't, as we've seen, drive up costs.
Yeah. And there are naysayers out there, of course, when this numbers came out. I had a feeling this was going to happen, saying that for a lot of reasons. Maybe it was distorted because of these numbers were distorted because of the shutdown. Some even going so far as to say they were made up. How do you approach, or do you just ignore these naysayers?
Well, I mean, there are naysayers, but there are also people who are serious economists who say the right thing. And so Austin Goolsbee, my old friend from grad school, who's now the Chicago Fed president, right? He said, "Oh, I should have voted to cut rates, and given what's going on with CPI, it seems like you could do that again." Jason Furman, the former CEA chair for President Obama, said this something approximately like, "This is either a really, really great number or a great number." And so I think that the people who are called the numbers correctly are saying the right thing. But the question for Americans is, like, how do you think about what's going on next? What about next year? And the bottom line is we've got everything lined up to have a great year, a golden age for America.
Well, the Fed is a question because, of course, they have this belief, the old Phillips curve, that you can't have growth like this, strong growth, without having a tick up in inflation. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing I didn't prepare, I showed you the GDP numbers during Reagan. During that time of incredible growth during the Reagan administration, inflation was coming down for the most of it. There were a couple of exceptions, but for the most of it, it came down. And it looks like that's happening now. Will this be a wake-up call for the Fed? The fact that we do see a decline in inflation, maybe it's temporary, maybe it's not. I think it's not for the reasons we mentioned. But you can have lower inflation with higher growth. Will the Fed finally admit that?
You know, one of the things, I think they will, because, you know, the president has a bunch of great candidates for the Fed, and every single one of them understands, but every single one of them understands that we've got to reform this thing. But think about this. My staff looked back to the summer and looked at the numbers, and 94% of the forecasts on Bloomberg, and 61 out of 62 for today's GDP release, 94% were underestimating the Trump economy. 94%.
Wow.
And so the point is that those people at Wall Street that are underestimating the Trump economy, 61 out of 62 saying we're not going to have this much growth, and then maybe if we have this much growth, we'll have high inflation. Those are very often the same people who are trained by the folks that are working at the Fed.
Yes,
absolutely. And so what we got to do is we got to get some people trained by Art Laffer and other people from the University of Chicago who understand that it's not a demand-side economy, it's not a supply-side economy, it's a supply and demand side. And so if the Democrats go nuts with demand, you're going to have inflation. If you really, really increase supply, then you won't. And that's the message of today's GDP
release, there's another message, I think, about supply-siders, which is optimism. There's an optimistic view of human beings that they will react positively to the right incentives. It's not an end game where everything is, you know, works out kind of so. If you give people the right incentives, they will grow the economy. And one thing that the president wrote about in his Truth Social piece that you mentioned was look to that optimism. He says, "I want my new Fed chairman to lower interest rates if the market is doing well, not destroy the market for no reason whatsoever. I want to have a market that goes up on good news and down on bad news the way it should be and the way it was." Is that what you want?
That's a metric. That's a metric of whether we're doing things right. And so the bottom line is, if there's out of control inflation coming because of a big demand shock, the Fed should raise rates and the market should celebrate. But if you get a big supply side growth, then the Fed could keep rates where they are or go down. And President Trump's right about that.
Just one other warning that a lot of people are looking at is the price of gold. And a lot of supply siders also look to gold as an indicator of where inflation is going to be. Today it was up to $4,500. For goodness sakes. I'm just wondering if that could be the skunk at the garden party. You know, if maybe gold is telling us something. What do you think?
No, I think that what gold is telling us is the same thing that we saw in the GDP release from consumers. And so you remember the consumer sentiment, people are saying, oh, consumers are in the doldrums, they're not going to spend any money. And then we get this blockbuster GDP release that's got a lot of consumption. Well, people consume more when they're optimistic about the future. If they think they're going to lose their job next year, then they have precautionary saving because they think, oh, if I lose my job, I got to pay the rent and so on. And so the fact that people are willing to spend shows they're optimistic about the growth that we're going to see. And that's true for precious metals, too. So think about how precious metals have become so essential to all the high-tech stuff that we have in our economy. True. I think that's like palladium and everything else. They're skyrocketing, I think, for good reasons.
Final question. Is there any chance of another another reconciliation package before the end of next year.
Yeah, not this year, but
No.
but for sure next year is something that's being studied. I know that there are people that are wondering whether we should do it or not, but my guess is that in the end there'll be another one, if I had to guess.
And
but
any
but the
chance
point
of-
is
any
that there are a
chance
lot
of
of people on the
Steve
Hill that
Forbes?
are worried
Any
about
chance
it.
of Steve Forbes' flat tax in there?
Steve Forbes, an old friend of mine, has made a really strong case for a flat tax. But
Yeah.
my guess is the case is going to have to be stronger if we're going to
All
get
right.
everybody on the Hill to vote for it.
Kevin Hassett, congratulations,
David.
Kevin. A great day for the White House. Great day
And,
for your
yeah,
economic
Merry
policy.
Christmas to you, too.
Merry Christmas to you as well.